Okay, we've got everyone here, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. Thanks, everyone. We've got a lot of material to go through today, so we'll try and keep it timely and efficient and do it in the 2.5 hours. First of all, any conflicts to declare on anyone's behalf?
None here.
None here, Kevin.
Okay.
None.
Okay, turning to the consent agenda then. Why don't we go through the, start with you, Lisa, and take us away.
Sure, Kevin. So I'll just briefly touch on the key highlights in the book, which is on page 5 there. So the purpose of this is really to outline what's in the materials today for consideration by the Farm Committee. And we have 3 items for approval today, namely the 2021 Farm Committee Work Plan, which is item 3B, the External Audit Plan for Waterfront Toronto's year-end financial statements, which is item 5, and we have BDO here with us today for that, and an item in closed session related to internal audit fees, which is item 8B. We also have in the consent agenda a number 10 to be precise of our regular quarterly updates. And we also will have reports from 3 independent third parties today, namely, as I mentioned, our external auditor from BDO, our internal auditor from MNP, as well as our independent capital project monitor for the Portland Flood Protection Project. Joanne is here from BTY. And then finally, in the closed session today, we have an annual review, or the annual review of the corporation's risk appetite statement, together with 2 reports related to cybersecurity. One from management, including from Waterfront Toronto Senior Manager of IT, Chris Giles, as well as the second one is from MNP related to a follow-up audit on cybersecurity. So that's really the key highlights of today's meeting. Back to you, Kevin.
Let me back off mute and back off. I'm just looking at our agenda here.
So that I can talk to this one if you like, the farm work plan.
Yep, let's
So
go to the farm plan, which you do need to approve. Thank you.
Yep. So this really just outlines the work plan for the Farm Committee for the year in terms of the key items that are reviewed at each of the 4 quarterly meetings. It's based on the updated Farm Committee mandate, which adds a couple of items or makes clear a couple of items that have been discussed at prior Farm Committee meetings related to the annual review of the insurance program, as well as oversight of cybersecurity risk as part of enterprise risk. And it also includes or makes clear oversight related to Waterfront Toronto's implementation of fundraising strategies. So this is meant as a guide. It doesn't mean that there's not additional items that can be discussed at the 4 quarterly meetings, but it really, it basically makes sure that all the areas of the Farm Committee are covered off at the 4 meetings.
Okay, I don't think there's anything really contentious there. Is it anyone think that it warrants dialogue before we approve that?
Patrick's got his hand up.
Okay, Patrick.
Yeah, nothing. It was just more to add something. I discussed it with Lisa yesterday. I thought a regular review of delegations of authority and to be sure that they aligned with the risk appetite and materiality. I just thought that would be useful. And the only other item, and this is more of a takeaway, would be as regards oversight for ESG related elements. I just wanted to know, I think it'd be useful to appreciate where management thought that oversight should take place, farm or human resources, or but that's not for today. That it was just a comment. Thanks.
Noted. Thanks, Patrick.
Okay. Thank you.
Otherwise, I'll make the motion.
Okay, can I get a seconder of that motion?
I'll second it, Kevin. It's Jeannie.
Okay, thanks, Jeannie. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, we have our marching orders for another year then. Turning now to the draft minutes of our last open session back in November. We'll take those as read. Was there any comments or concerns on the minutes?
None here.
None.
Okay, I'll have a motion to approve then. If I
I'll move
could.
it, Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Jeannie. Seconder.
Sure.
Okay, and all in favor? Okay, I'll declare those carried. Okay, moving right along, let's go to the macro dashboard. Cover sheet there. Lisa, I'll turn it over to you to highlight the
Sure.
areas that you think we should focus on.
I know, do you want to go to the next page, please? So this is the macro dashboard that gives kind of a high level of the key areas that the Farm Committee has oversight for, or several key areas the Farm Committee has oversight for. One of them relates to our corporate plan and how we're performing with respect to the key deliverables that we outlined in the corporate plan, our budget, our revenues, and our KPIs, or our key performance indicators. And you'll see that of the 4 areas, all are green except for the capital investment plan, which relates to some resequencing that was done for the Portland's flood protection project. That's not new. That was orange in the prior Farm Committee macro dashboard. So it's not new. And David Custerin is going to be talking about that Portland's flood protection project later in the consent agenda. So if there are any questions related to that, that can be covered there. And then you see under finance and admin, all the areas are green there as well. And we have separate reports on each of those areas. So I won't comment further on those because we will cover them shortly. And then under the capital projects, there's two orange areas related to budget / schedule risk, one for Portlands and one for complete communities, which have been there. They're not new for the Farm Committee. And again, David has supplementary reports that cover those. So I wouldn't propose to go into those right now unless someone has a high level question. David will be covering them. But there's nothing materially changed from the last time we met on this dashboard.
Okay. Anybody want to discuss any of these elements? Some of it I went through with Lisa already, but nothing that caused me any concern. Liquidity is good and everything. Anybody want to raise any issues that are arising out of the dashboard?
Kevin, it's Jeannie here. I just had a quick question. Lisa, in your
Yeah.
report, you talk about increased volume of government audits may stretch Waterfront Toronto resources. Do we have a good handle on what kind of audits we're looking at for this year or next, or are there surprise ones that may show up? And what happens if our resources are stretched? What's the plan?
So most of the good news, Jeannie, is that most of the work has been done now. So it was the value for money, follow-up value for money audit from the Auditor General, which took place last year. The Tri-Government Strategic Review, which while ongoing, Waterfront Toronto has spent a lot of time already on that. And the City Auditor General Risks and Opportunities Assessment is largely completed as well. So from that perspective, we're in good shape. The governments are looking to put together a tri-government audit plan for Waterfront Toronto, and they're working on that and looking at the timing. And we have shared with them our own internal audit plan, so that they're aware of the scope and the timing. And they don't want to overburden us, but they also want to do what they need to do in terms of compliance and that kind of thing. I wouldn't mind making a comment just with respect to the results of the Auditor General follow-up audit, which is on the next slide, I know. And that in December 2018, the Auditor General of Ontario issued the value for money report for Waterfront Toronto and Ontario Ministry of Infrastructure. And 2 years later, she has completed a follow-up audit, and that was released in December. And what I'm pleased to report is that of the 22 action items that were directed towards Waterfront Toronto, the Auditor General found that Waterfront had fully implemented 20 of those, which is a 91% implementation rate, which is really good. And then of the 2 remaining action items or recommendations, one relates to implementation of a financial sustainability plan, which is the Auditor General focused her comments largely on fundraising and philanthropic opportunities. And as you know, we're well on our way we've developed a plan and we're well on our way to implementing that. And then the second outstanding action item relates to the Portland's flood protection and the effectiveness of our work in in reducing the impact of construction risks on the final cost. And the Auditor General has said that she would have to wait till the end of the project to assess whether we've been successful in that. So that will be a recurring item that we'll have to wait until 2024.
And the only thing, Kevin, that I would say is Lisa and I had the discussion with the Auditor General before the report was released, and she was very pleased with the progress that the corporation has made.
Okay, good to hear. I see Patrick has his hand up.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Chair, thank you. Just, I was reading within the enterprise risk, just on the Villiers business plan. I just wanted to get a sense as to timeline as to when we would be receiving that, and if there was any implications for Quayside as a result of that business plan. You know, just real high level on that front.
Yeah, that's tied up in the roles and responsibilities, Patrick, related to the Tri-Government Strategic Review. So Villiers Island is largely on land owned by Creatio in the City of Toronto. And so that's part of the scope of the Tri-Government Strategic Review is determining how the roles and responsibilities and how that will work going forward, and Waterfront Toronto's specific role. So that's largely why we haven't shared the draft business plan yet. We do, and George, feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in here, Lisa. So we've had discussions with Creatio. We've already begun, our staff, Meg's team, on the business improvement plan for Villiers, but we shared the initial draft with Creatio, and there's a meeting coming up that's going to discuss the next steps on that. So we've been working very well with Creatio, just basically working together and then sorting out roles as we get to know each other's business a little better. So I think that's going to be coming very shortly, Patrick.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just from an implication for Quayside and maximizing public realm, if there's any if there's anything to keep in mind there, that would be useful. If I may, Chair, I also had a quick comment on procurement. I just was hoping to see, a review of our procurement policy and what it was doing within the context of corporate objectives and metrics. So let's say something like inclusion, equity, diversity, how our procurement policy was helping to enable that. I'm sure there's a number of other elements there, including ESG. So just it's more of a comment and hopefully a follow-up at some later date, but that would be my thoughts there. And let me just see, I think I have one more point. I think I can ask that in closed. Oh, and just, sorry, on page 33, we talk about number 5, development and implementation of financial sustainability plan. I think I've mentioned it before, but that from a philanthropy and a diversification of cash flows, I think the majority of the philanthropy is sort of spoken for. So it's not new money, but certainly, I know we've talked about this previously, but just the joint ventures and in looking at that, hopefully within the tri-party strategic plan, there's some discussion there. And lastly, just the looking towards cash flow driven investments, with Quayside and all that's going on there. Are there opportunities for looking at things from a cash flow perspective? So that's it. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Patrick. And we're definitely looking at all of those things. And Villiers, the business plan that you mentioned, fits right into that financial sustainability plan. So thank you for those comments.
Oh, maybe, sorry, one last thing. Just on the, sorry, on page 36, we talk about performance measured framework. As regards Quayside, I would be, I think it'd be an important KPI to establish how many RFQ submissions we would be expecting, not only domestically but globally. And my assumption is, but I would want it within the KPIs that anybody that gets to the RFP stage and is selected for the RFP stage, that they would all submit. I think those are our targets so that we can benchmark, particularly in the RFQ stage, where we stand versus our expectations. And now I'm really done. Thank you.
Okay. Where are we at now? Losing my place on the agenda. I apologize. Do we need to
We can,
review the? Do we need to review the internal audit plan at all?
we're not up to there yet.
Oh,
You mean, sorry, the internal audit recommendation status.
there.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yep.
Yeah, you'd have to go back a couple. I know.
Patrick, it's Jeannie here. I just looked at my notes, and I believe Meg had said in one of our previous meetings that the hope was that we would receive 20 submissions at the RFQ stage.
Yeah, I just would want that formalized and also understand what the global participation, what that expectation is globally.
Yeah, if I can jump in, Kevin, I think one of the things we have to look at is which KPIs are we monitoring from a public reporting perspective? And I think I mentioned, and I know we have internal audit on this agenda, is that we need to start looking at that, because how many KPIs do we have right now, Lisa?
The corporate
30.
KPIs are around just over 20,
Yeah.
25 maybe.
So I think we need to decide which ones are we reporting on publicly, which ones would we just use for operational reporting.
Yeah, that would, just to be clear, George, that wouldn't be for public dissemination, but for a board appreciation as to.
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, and that's rightly so. I should have made the intent was not for public dissemination.
I know it's on in a forward slide, the internal audit recommendation status.
Yes, because it's a confidential attachment, and this.
Okay, it's not there.
So,
No worries. Yeah. I mean, overall, in terms of the outstanding internal audit recommendations, there's one related to our HR guidelines that is due to be completed next month, and that's on track to be completed next month. And then the remainder relate to the recent performance measures audit that was completed in the fall. And so those we're actively working on, and those will be addressed throughout this calendar year and fully implemented by the end of the calendar year. So there's nothing in there that should have been completed that has not yet been completed.
Okay. Good to hear.
Maybe we could move on to the financial statements and let Sampata give a few highlights related to that.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So these are.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Kevin. If we could just turn to page 44 of the material. So I'm presenting the interim unaudited financial statements for the 9 months ended December 31st, 2020. As usual, I like to go through some key financial statement items, some from the statement of financial position, some from the statement of financial activities, and some from the notes to the financial statements. So let's start with the statement of financial position. And the first item I would like to look at is cash as of December 31st, 2020, which is about 115 million. Now, this cash is slightly higher than what we would like it to be at this stage. Generally, we tend to maintain about 3 months working capital for Portland's, which should be in the region of 85 to 90 million. However, there were certain payments that we would have liked to make before December, but due to the holidays, over the Christmas holidays, we were not able to make those payments. Those payments have subsequently been made after December. So this cash level should ideally have been at 85 to 90 million. The second item is receivables at 15 million. The receivables are generally receivables from most of them almost 12 million are from the city of Toronto, and they are just for regular activities like Lakeshore Bridge Phase 1, as well as some for the phase or Waterfront 1.0 projects, and some about 3 million or so is for HST receivable, which is very normal. About 2 to 3 months of HST receivable at quarter end is what we normally have. So receivables, nothing out of the ordinary here. The next item is restricted cash and investments, 31 million almost. A major component of this is almost 20 million is holdback liabilities for Portland's. Some of these restricted cash are self-imposed restrictions, internal restrictions. Holdback is one of them. We set aside that cash in a separate account just to have that amount ready for when it becomes payable. And some of these are external restrictions, for example, broadband services and developer contributions for public arts, where these agreements require us to maintain these cash in a separate bank account. The next item I would like to go through is the assets under development. You can see that there is almost an increase of about 212 million since March 2020, and almost 190 million of this is on account of Portland's, which is consistent with the expenditures this year for Portland's. Under liabilities, I would like to draw your attention to 95 million of deferred contributions. Again, these are contributions that we have received and which have not spent. In line with the working capital that we are supposed to maintain for Portland's, these deferred contributions are normal. Almost about 60 to 70 million of them are Portland's, which is consistent with the spent. In line with the of them are for public art contributions, which we've received the contributions, but yet to spend them. I know if we can just please turn to page 45 of the material now. The next page, which is the statement of financial activities. I'd like to go through 3 items over here. The revenues. The revenues have gone down from 151 million in December 2019 to about 124.8 million, 125 million as of December 31st, 2020. Now, this is just a timing difference. You will notice that we haven't requested so far this year anything from the province for the Portlands, but we have submitted a request of about 78 million in January, which is not reflected in these revenues. So by year end, this position is expected to reverse, and our revenues would be in line with last year. Again, only timing differences. If we look at the expenses section, these are the expenses. Basically, we do not capitalize them, and most of these expenses are as a result of the signature projects, mostly Destination Playground, which were initiated in mid 2019. One significant or a key item to note over here is under the net operating loss. We are reporting a slight loss of 41,000. It's because of the COVID impact on our parking operations at 7 Queens Quay. Since March, these operations or parking operations at 7 Queens Quay have been impacted, and we have actually recorded a provision for doubtful debts of about 650K, which has brought which has resulted in this loss. It's also coupled with the interest income. The effective interest rate has gone down considerably since last year. Again, due to COVID, the Bank of Canada Prime has gone down. So the parking operations combined with the interest revenue is what has caused this loss in this year, in this period. If we can go now to the notes, if we can please go to page 50 of the material. If you look at the note on credit facility, we received some comments, excellent comments last time at this meeting in November, which we have incorporated in our notes this time. One of them is related to the credit facility. We were not naming, the lender. So if you notice that now we have actually not really named the lender, but we have mentioned that we've secured this credit facility in the first line from a Canadian commercial bank. Can go to turn to page 52 of the material now, which is a note that I like to discuss on the unrestricted surplus or deficit.
Sampana, before you go on,
Yes.
Patrick just put up his hand. Did you have a question, Patrick?
Yeah, I did it just before we get going, just on page 47, the cash flows from investing activities. How come it's, since we're cash rich, I just didn't understand the gap from year over year. Is that somehow what we're paying for money that we have set aside? Like what is exactly driving that differential?
Are you referring to the cash flow statement, statement of
Yeah.
cash flows?
Yeah. Cash
And
flow from
is it
investing activities.
Oh, I mean, this particular investing activities is related to, the investments that we had last year, which were in securities that we had invested. We don't have those anymore this year. So it's very small section of, we had some investments in securities, which this year basically redeemed. And the only difference over there is the restricted cash and investments, which we report as investing activities. So, and that was the point I mentioned about the holdbacks and public card contributions, which we keep in separate bank accounts as well as holdback liability. But for the most part, if you see the second line of that one, you will notice that at December 2019, we had about 10 million in investments, but all of them have matured since there were no investments this year.
Okay, thank you.
Answer your question?
Yep.
Can we please go to page 52 of the material? This is the note on unrestricted deficit, surplus deficit. As I like to mention every time, if you look at note 12B, we have an unrestricted deficit of 13 million. And as I mentioned, this position will reverse when we get those land sale revenues from Quayside in Q4 of 21-22. So it is like a balancing. We have incurred some expenditures out of those revenues. When those revenues materialize in Q4 of 21-22, this position will be changed to a surplus. Note page 55 of the material, note 15. Here we have incorporated another change that was suggested as in the farm committee last in November. We have made in the risk disclosures, we have made a reference to the risk disclosures to note to the COVID impact note disclosure in note 24. So we are in note 15, we are making a reference to the COVID impact because we realize that these disclosures are not the COVID impact and the credit, liquidity, or market risk disclosures, currency risk disclosure, they're not mutually exclusive.
Sampana.
See, Michael,
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Michael.
Thanks. Thanks for making those revisions. Just on the risk disclosure, as I was reviewing this part of the financial statements and seeing, kind of what happened in Texas over the last week or so, just and I've seen this generally in risk disclosure and particularly in the public company context, the impact of climate change, particularly when the biggest capital spend that we have with the corporation is flood protection, which I think is probably the result of climate change. It's just a question for management to think about how risk disclosure should encompass that, or whether it even should. If the impact of climate change is real and progressing, what impact does that have on that project and the project going over budget or over time or not being adequate? I'm just considering if it's a risk that we want to think about and disclose, because I just see this as, this section is typically as a, kind of a defensive position for management in their disclosures. So I just wanted to a comment, not suggesting a change, but just something to think about.
That's an excellent comment. Thank you, Michael. We will look
Thank
at
you,
that.
Michael.
Michael, I may add, in my former role as Deputy Minister in Infrastructure, we put out a policy for municipalities and for provincial ministries and agencies that they should be looking at the climate change impact when they're doing their asset management plans and reflecting that. So that's something that we put some guidance out from the provincial government, and we should look at that for ourselves as well.
Chair, if I may, I think that does point to the element of which committee would have oversight on ESG, to Michael's point.
Yeah, and I think, Patrick, we're going to have discussions as we review the mandate of committees in the HR and Governance Committee coming up.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
And I just have one last point
Okay.
to mention over here.
Please proceed.
Yeah, page 57. Again, based on the suggestion that and the comments received at the last form, we have now added a note related to related party transactions, which is note 20 essentially, to reflect primarily the arm's length nature of the transactions between us and the governments. With that, I conclude my presentation, and I'll be happy to take any more questions that you might have.
Okay.
Thanks, Sampata.
Yes. Thanks very much. Good presentation.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Any other questions around the financial statements? Not hearing none. On a matter for approval. So I guess with that, will we turn it now over to David to go through some of the capital projects?
Certainly. I know if we can go to page 60. And I'll spend just a couple of minutes on the Portland's Flood Protection Dashboard. There are a number of changes in this reporting period they wanted to draw your attention to. First of all is that the estimate at completion is now reflecting the 90% cost estimate stage gate in terms of the projects and contingency. And again, we're comparing that to our 30% approved budget. So as you can see here, some changes from a budget perspective, due primarily to the way soil is being accounted for, the overall cost of the river and flood protection work is reduced, or showing as reduced from 30%, so about 690 million versus the 714 at 30%. Our costs for parks and public realm are up by about 10 million, and again, that has to do with the way soils are accounted for. Costs related to roads and services are up about 20 million, and that is largely in relation to utility cost sharing impact. And then the final one, bridges and structures, is down somewhat, and that is really just related to the way tender results and estimates have worked out. In terms of contingency, at 90%, we had a unused contingency or unallocated contingency of approximately 51 million. As of the end of December, we are down to 41 million. That is as a result of a number of changes. What we're doing now is reflecting contingency utilization on a real-time basis. So every tender and change that is processed formally through the project is compared to the 90% EAC, and where those numbers don't align exactly, we are either taking money from or adding money back to the contingency. So those that's reflective of the end of December's numbers, and as we get to the end of this report, I'll point out to you where those numbers are reflected. With respect to the financial summary, we are continuing to forecast $1.185 billion. You can see that there are a number of projects, just a few projects that are reporting over budget from 30%, offset by those that are reporting on or under budget, and the balance addressed through the remaining contingency. I won't spend, so that's onto the next page, I know. Won't spend too much time here, apart from noting that we are currently at about 34% overall in terms of project progress on the total project. Okay. With respect to risks and impacts, unchanged at this point, although we are on a biannual basis updating our risk register. We actually update the risk register on a monthly basis, but on a biannual basis, we will be updating the risk quantification. So that process is underway for this half of the year. And based on that, there may be changes to our top risks. In this case, the top 5 risks are actually opportunities related to cost share reimbursements, with the largest cost risk to us under the water treatment system capacity in terms of potential value. And in that instance, we have quantified that at this point in time, and the impact is actually about $3 million. And that'll be reflected once commitments are made in the system. With respect to schedule, I know if we go to page 62, you can see that due to the resequencing of the projects, delays that have been experienced on certain of the project tasks, we are reflecting quite a different project schedule. From a program perspective, we are still forecasting to be complete before the end of 2023, and certainly in advance of our March 31st, 2024 completion date. Having said that, we are in the process, working with BTY, of rebaselining the schedule to
being adequate. I'm just
with or to reflect what our current schedule is. We're finding that this reporting is not very useful. We're not able to identify projects that are either slipping or advancing, because so many of them are reporting behind either red or yellow. So we want to bring this back up to essentially green across the board, so that we can then begin to understand the impacts of schedule delays or otherwise on a regular basis. And I see Patrick has his hand up.
Thanks, David. Always good info. I just had a question on global supply chain and how dependent we would be for the timely fulfillment of our projects on global supply chain. And, historically, there's been some steel and X, Y, and Z type things, and I just wanted to get a sense if that was what type of risk you felt that was.
It's not a large risk given what we're doing. I mean, a big part of the project is actually dealing with soil excavation, soil treatment. So that's obviously not affected. All of the steel for the bridges has been bent and is now back in Canada. So that risk is not is no longer there. We did have some delays related to blowers or fans for the StarX soil treatment. The StarX soil treatment facility, that's a temporary installation. It's not actually part of the permanent installation, but those blowers have arrived, and the balance of the materials, soils coming to the site, growing media, landscape materials, all of that is local, so is not impacted, as are for the most part, pipes, ducts. It's all concrete. It's all locally produced. So there's very, very little in terms of materials or products that are coming from overseas on this project. And
any expertise? Like I remember great U.S. workers for very specific tasks. Would that also?
So we've accommodated those workers at this stage. There may be in the future additional, additional workers because some of the technologies that we're using are more applicable to the U.S. market than ours. However, at this point in time, those contracts have been awarded. The work's underway, and we've worked with the contractor to mitigate any issues with respect to cross-border travel for their resources.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
David, with the number of red dots on there, as we talked about before, you and I anyways, are we sure that you're still comfortable that we're on time? These are all bumps in the road, but it just seems to me there's a lot of red dots on the status there.
Well, and there are, and I guess to put it in context, in our baseline schedule, for example, I'll give you a couple of very good examples, and they're not all applicable to this. We did have a very major delay in one of the key areas, which was the cutoff walls for the river, but the excavation is proceeding, on schedule now. But some of these are reflective of things like the Cherry Street. We had originally intended to reopen all of Cherry Street in 2021. We made a very specific choice not to reopen Cherry Street in 2021 because it would have required us to do a number of things. One was to do temporary fit out or temporary work on the LRT bridge to make it usable by vehicles. So that would have meant also providing additional roads that diverted onto the LRT bridge, providing another road that came from Cherry Street, Old Cherry Street to New Cherry Street. So we elected to delay that work until 2022, delay the opening until 2022 to avoid those costs. So there was a very specific reason why we did that. Another example is that a couple of the parks were originally scheduled to be completed in 2022. Well, there's no particular reason for us to complete the parks in 2022. And, so as we've gone through this process, some of those schedules have been amended as well as we focused on other work and did, other or resequenced that work. So while they're reporting behind, they were always early to begin with. So we're not actually impacting the final deliverables. We're just impacting when they get delivered in the timeline between now and March 2024. So just to finalize that, we are still comfortable that the March 2024 completion date is achievable. We just want to be able to track it more accurately and, on a more real-time basis, which is why we want to re-baseline the schedule and start reporting from today's schedule as opposed to a schedule that was created 2 years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Jeannie and Patrick. Jeannie first, I think.
Hi, David. So it sounds, I guess, in the BTY report, you guys are redoing the scheduling, which is great. I guess it looks like it's going to be done today. I mean, this month or by the end of this month. So we'll I guess for the next meeting, we'll have an updated schedule.
You'll see it looks like it'll actually get done in March, but you will see it at the next meeting. Yeah.
Okay. In the BTY report, it also mentions here that should the Lakeshore Bridge modification scope be added, that the baselining is actually a delay in the substantial completion of the project to June 20. Do we wait till that part of it for clarification, or?
No, I can respond to that. In fact, the way the Lakeshore Bridge schedule works, including the additional work that we've added from the city, is that we will, currently that schedule indicates that we will achieve flood protection by March 2024. The rest of the work related to the Lakeshore Bridge and Lakeshore Boulevard work will take until the end of 2024. So the overall schedule or the overall amount of work will take us beyond March 2024. But for flood protection itself, we are still reflecting a achievement of 2024. So in compliance with March 2024. So in compliance with the contribution agreement with the 3 levels of government.
Oh, okay, that was just the part that I needed clarification on. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Patrick?
Yeah, great. Look, it makes sense to rebase, and but when the information is available, could committee members receive it rather than waiting for the farm?
Certainly, as soon as we reflect it in an updated dashboard, we can circulate that.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Just some
Sorry,
quick.
David, just to
Yeah,
confirm.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Sorry, just
go
to follow up on the schedule. So you're working in together with BTY?
Yeah,
on
Elliston and
roofing.
BTY are working together along with
Okay,
our
perfect.
team to develop that schedule so that we're all on the same page, the same baseline, if you will. So yeah, it's gone through reviews with BTY in copious amounts of detail. I think Joanne
Great.
would attest.
Okay, and this rebaselining is assuming that all these hydro issues are resolved in the next 60 to 90 days? On that?
Well, hydro is not an issue. And
Sorry,
we
the
can,
Enbridge.
yeah, yes, it assumes that we are going to be able to address the Enbridge gas issue, and we can talk about that when we get to that in the
Yes,
the
okay,
camera part.
thank you.
Okay. Okay, so just some photos. Don't need to go through that too much. You can see that the next bridge is it's actually now moved to the paint shop. So the Commissioner's Bridge is being painted, and work continues. We are about 95% complete excavation in the spillway, Don Greenway, and of course we're complete 100% excavation in the Central River Valley, and have now installed at about 90% of the total risk management measures. So moving on, don't go too fast.
David, just quickly, can you remind me when that Commissioner Street Bridge is being installed? Just because of PR
Yeah,
opportunity.
the next one comes in April.
April, okay.
April, and then the balance of them are scheduled to come over the course of the balance of this year, with the last one currently scheduled to sort of hit the last barge before the Christmas shutdown of the or the winter shutdown of the St. Lawrence Seaway. We do actually have Elliston looking at if there are any impacts to the bridge deliveries. What happens if the final bridge is the Cherry Street North vehicular bridge? If that bridge misses the shutdown window or hits the shutdown window and it doesn't arrive until the spring of 2022, what, if anything, is the impact on the project? So Elliston is actually examining that for us right now, so that we we don't get surprised in December if it doesn't show up, given that it's scheduled to hit so close to that, and if there's an early shutdown, we could be impacted.
Okay.
Okay, next slide, and here the last bit very quickly I want to talk about is this is the we will be providing on a quarterly basis this updated contingency utilization chart. So you can see that in November and December, 10.3 million was allocated from contingency to the project. And then if we go to the next, leaving 41.3 million, go to the next slide. We are providing details of how that number is derived. So this material is being shared with BTY as well. And in the case of the last or November and December, we committed about 48 million in contracts, and about 10 million of that, and that's changes and new tenders. About 10 million of that was impacted the contingency. The largest one was, you can see the third from the bottom, just about a $4.5 million commitment to Toronto Hydro. We had anticipated Toronto Hydro to be funding this amount in its entirety, and that is not the way the final discussions went with Hydro, so we had to pick up about $4.5 million for this out of contingency. Having said that, since we've done this, we have, as mentioned separately, confirmed with Hydro that they will be funding the enhancements, Toronto Hydro enhancements, and we had at the time of 90% included those enhancements in our estimate of completion and had taken that money out of contingency. So we will be putting that money back in contingency for those enhancements, and that'll be reflected in our next report.
Thanks. I see Michael has his hand up.
Michael.
Thanks, David. And maybe this is more appropriate in the closed session, if you think, but
on a biannual basis,
the relationship with Ellis Don and kind of their performance to date, and how satisfactory or any areas for improvement, just generally given the size of the project and their mandate. But if you think it's more appropriate in closed session, happy to hear it there too. Whatever makes sense.
I think we can actually discuss it now. I think that and Steve mentioned this on Wednesday, and Steve was not wrong. I was a little glib, but we do actually have a very good relationship with Ellis Don. They are working with us as partners. They are identifying and working very hard to mitigate risk, to ensure that we are only paying for what we should be paying for. Working very hard with subtrades to come up with innovative solutions, and aren't simply just implementing what they see, and very often that's an issue where the contractor assumes no responsibility for the design, and they're not responsible for the design from a liability perspective, but they simply say, well, that's what was on the drawing, so that's what we implemented, and it doesn't really matter what the costs are. So Ellis Don's not taking that position. They've taken ownership of the budget. They're working very hard to achieve the budget. So when they see things or tenders come in or changes come in that that don't align with where we need to be, they're working very hard to on certain of the issues, and they're doing the same thing from a schedule perspective. Working, I'd say they're working very much in partnership. There's very little conflict. Where there are issues, it's around, and these are complex issues, but it's around soil treatment, soil reuse. I mean, I'd say that they're working very hard to mitigate risk and cost there, but it's a very complex piece of work, and they're not the only ones involved in it. So they're the management of that has taken some pretty heavy lifting, and it's kind of specialized work. I don't know if Julius is on the call, if there's anything he would add. I'm not sure he made this call this morning.
No, I'm here.
But
nothing to add, David. You've got it covered.
Yeah, so I'm very happy with the relationship, and we have a good relationship both with our people in the on the ground in the field, as well as our relationship with the head office and the executives, and we can and do engage with Jeff Smith and Max Mantha and Joe Rigo on a when we need to, and we actually have regular calls with them to talk about issues from a delivery perspective. So I'd say very good.
Yeah, David, is Dave Kirkland involved in the project? I thought he was.
He is the construction manager. Yes, he is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Good.
Yeah, I would just echo what David said. We've talked to Jeff, and Steve mentioned at the last board meeting, you heard from Jeff. They're extremely pleased also with the relationship, and I think that's been one of the critical factors of David being successful in mitigating the pandemic and juggling things. And as we said, we're going to have to look at how we monitor the reds and the greens on that chart with the dots, because sometimes those are planned reds that actually make sense. And Ellis Don was critical to making sure that we came on basically juggling things that didn't affect the overall time frame.
Okay. Bayside External Services, I will just note, I won't walk through this one. However, we are in the process of working to finalize the completion of the project, and essentially we're at the point where we're doing commissioning, and it's a complex building, it's a complex process, and it's a complex undertaking, especially in trying to satisfy Toronto Water and ensuring that all of these processes are working together appropriately. So that's going to take us some time. We are targeting the end of March for completion. I wouldn't be surprised, based on the way other projects have gone of this sort, that it takes longer than that, and may in fact be April or May before all of that software is completely fine-tuned and the system is operating to its full potential. I would note one other thing. We found out this morning that the Times of London has ranked this facility one of the top 10 coolest buildings in the world. So that's kind of interesting. Not something you'd expect from a stormwater treatment facility. And it's kind of cool because it is also a stormwater treatment facility, which is a very unique structure. I don't think that, I think what we don't often reflect on is that this is something new. This isn't being done in the city. This is the first one where stormwater is being treated for reuse before it's discharged into the lake. So very happy with the results here.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Well done.
I think that's it for me.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, David. Where are we next? Go back to my agenda. Lisa, where are we at now? Do you want to?
We're a bit behind schedule, Kevin.
Yeah.
So my suggestion would be to take the procurement report and the regulatory compliance as read. For the fundraising action plan, we do have Ian McMullen, Waterfront Toronto's new Executive Director of Philanthropy, with us today.
Yep.
It would be worth a brief introduction, George.
Yeah, no, you know what? I meant to do that at the beginning, and Lisa, this is a good time to introduce Ian. So Ian is our new hire in charge of our philanthropy. We went through actually a very stiff competition. There were a lot of very good candidates, but Ian really impressed us. And one of the great points that Ian made that kind of rested with me was, when we were talking about fundraising, he pointed out, he said, if you're asking for money, you should ask them for advice. If you're looking for money, you should ask them for advice. If you're looking for advice, ask them for money. And I thought that was a great perspective on issues, but he has great experience on a number of major institutional fundraising projects. And Ian, if you can just maybe give a brief bio. And then Kevin, I think we might try to find a little time with you. And we've started with some of the other committee chairs just to have a brief discussion with Ian in the beginning of his role here.
I'd welcome that. Over to you, Ian.
Okay, right. I've been having sound problems on my computer, so shout out if you can't hear me. So I'm delighted to be at Waterfront. I've lived on Queens Quay West for quite a while. I keep a kayak on the island, so the waterfront and the harbor is my home and my playground. I'll introduce myself by telling a little story. I was speaking to a senior business leader earlier this week. She's on the board of CNRL and also on the board of Air Canada and a couple of other boards. So she's a pretty significant figure and also lives on Queens Quay West. And we were talking about fundraising for Waterfront. And he observed that, there's an inclusivity and diversity issue around this. The waterfront isn't the place where rich people go at the weekends or particularly rich people live, actually. She said she's one of the few. And this is a subject area, this building public spaces and adding to public spaces for the public good for everybody is an increasingly important issue that we've highlighted through COVID, and we've highlighted observing what's been going on south of the border. So she was quite supportive and recognized there's a shift beginning to happen as well. We're beginning to see early philanthropy for public spaces. You can cite Bentway and you can cite Grange Park as two examples where we have philanthropy occurring at a level we haven't seen before for these shared public spaces. Now, I've been in the business of charitable fundraising long enough to remember when there was no charitable giving to Ontario hospitals. Bill Davis changed the...
Just to put it in context, in our,
that pretty much forced every hospital in Ontario to run a fundraising campaign through the second half of the 1990s. Equally, so we went from no fundraising to significant fundraising for healthcare. We did the same thing through the 80s for universities. Now we have the University of Toronto received a $250 million gift in the last year. So I'm quite optimistic that we're going to be able to pull something interesting off in terms of going from no giving to public spaces to significant giving to public spaces around our projects on the waterfront. But like any new venture, it's going to take a little bit of time, and we're going to need to find the right leadership to do this. I've been through this cycle before, doing things that haven't been done before. And I'm stupid enough to recognize, or rather to believe it's possible. So I'm pretty optimistic, and I'm delighted to be on board. Any questions? Or
No,
Ian, do you want to just give a brief account of a couple of the places you've been before?
Oh, okay. My first fundraising job was Doctors Hospital in Toronto. Fundraising campaign in the late 80s, the little hospital that's now gone on College and Spadina. I was the first director of development at the University of Manchester, first director of development at London Business School. I started the fundraising program there in the mid-90s. Believe it or not, they were doing no fundraising up until then. I did a very strange project in Saudi Arabia for a university there, and I've been back in Canada for the last 10 years, private school, and then an environmental organization.
That's great. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, welcome, Ian, and big job. We welcome your contributions and look forward to meeting in person at some point, or at least by phone to see where I can help.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to take the, unless there's specific questions, I saw Jeannie had her hand up earlier, I think. Did we miss you on something, Jeannie?
Oh, hi. Hi, Ian. Nice to meet you. I'm a fellow Waterfront resident as well, so welcome.
Good.
I just had a quick question. When do we plan to start going out to actually start the fundraising?
Oh, good question. There's a little bit of fuzziness around some of this, but basically, we could go fundraising now. We have an agreement with the city not to go fundraising until we've established a memorandum of understanding about how we operate, because the things we're fundraising for will become city assets. So yeah, we're underway with those discussions. David Stonehouse is leading. But that's okay, because we have awful lot of preparation to do. The MOU and the trigger for us to go fundraising should occur in the middle of the year, subject to city consent. But there's an awful lot of preparation to do before we would be asking anybody for money. I always like to say 95% of the work in fundraising is getting people ready to be asked. 95% of the work in fundraising is getting people ready to be asked. The asking comes at the end of quite a long process of communication and education and explanation.
Okay, thank you.
Patrick?
Yeah, thank you. Look, I appreciate welcome aboard. I appreciate you're going to have a new sort of approach to things. So I was just wondering when you expected that plan or to
These are early to begin.
if it was going to be for the next farm committee or if it was going to be ahead of that.
I'm sorry, plan or a memorandum of understanding with the city?
More your plan, like the document in front of us isn't, I don't believe is yours.
Isn't mine? Yes. Right. Yeah, well, I think rather than change that, there'll be an evolution of that. I've only been on board about 4 weeks. So just figuring out who everybody is and how the organization works has been my first task. Yes, for the next farm committee, there will be an evolution of the plan. It won't be massively different, but it will be sort of mine rather than somebody else's.
So Patrick, I think, by the time we get through the city MOU and discussions, we're probably targeting the fall for a really kind of more precise plan.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to keep us moving here. Thanks for that, Ian. I think on the COVID impact update, I'm just going to take that as read. It's a good document. There isn't much new. If anyone wants to ask any specific questions, happy to do that, but don't see the need to go through it at this point. The internal audit plan update, that's the MNP people. I guess I will turn it over to Veronica then at this point to go through that report.
Sure. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Okay, so the first thing on the agenda for today is to look at the internal audit plan status. So there is a PowerPoint slide that has the 3-year plan. Yeah, so I think this is it. Perfect. Great. Next slide. Great. So this shows just where we're at on our 3-year plan. So we've completed the performance measurement framework audit, which we presented in September. And then later today in the closed session, we'll look at the cybersecurity follow-up audit. And then the last audit for this fiscal year is the resource and succession planning audit. So we've prepared a draft planning memo for that, and that's part of this package. And we just wanted to make an adjustment to the schedule to have the work, the audit started in Q1 of next year. It's just a little push out, just due to the current organization's priorities and commitments and that. So we'll get that audit started and completed April to June 2021, and then bring it to the September farm. And that just cascades a little bit to the next year's planned audits. So we had ERP system process and general controls planning to start in Q2. We'll just put that into Q3 to give a little bit of a break for staff. And then we'll be back on track for Q4 to do the project management process controls audit. So those will be the 2 for that fiscal 21-22. And then you can see the last 2 ones in the last 3rd year to look at communications processes and controls, as well as records and information management. Okay. I think Jeannie has your hand.
Yep.
Just a quick question to fellow board members. Should we consider switching records and information management and the communications processes and controls audits? I know they're both important, but I get a sense that maybe the records and information management maybe should be done first, because I know it's been flagged. I think when we had the Auditor General audit a few years ago, it's somewhat related to cybersecurity, and that's the reason why I wonder if we should just switch the order.
You have a view on that, Lisa?
Yeah, I do. The reason why it's there is because we are implementing over the next year and a half an enterprise content management strategy, where we're moving over documents that were in our SharePoint on-premises systems into our cloud-based SharePoint online systems. And there's a whole new information architecture that's being designed for that. There's a whole kind of hierarchy in terms of documents, what's confidential, what's sensitive, what's private information. It's quite an intensive process. So we wanted to allow time for that to be completed before we go and audit that new system.
Okay.
So that was the reason.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. And the next item is just if there's any questions on the planning memo that we've prepared for the resource and succession planning. So that the planning memo was provided in the package, and really it's going to be focusing on 3 areas. So the first one is resource and succession planning, which is really looking at the workforce needs and resource skills, and we're going to develop a key skills matrix for the organization. The second part of the scope is looking at the retention and employee engagement. So this is looking at the retention strategies, engagement strategies, and programs that are in place, and including career development. And then the last lens is looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, and just ensuring that that's incorporated within resource and succession planning as well as HR strategies. Yeah. And you can see there that our plan, so we've drafted this, we'll finalize the planning memo in March and then start that work April to May with a June completion time, and then presenting to the farm in September.
Okay.
Okay. Any specific questions on this next audit?
Seems well in hand. Thank you
Okay.
for your work on this.
No problem.
Anything else?
And the last part was will be in the closed session when we talk about the cybersecurity.
Okay. I believe next it's our friends at BDO for our external audit plan.
Yeah,
Who would
Jeff,
like to
a
cover
very
that?
high level overview. Jeff Barrett from BDO is here with us today.
Okay, great.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, in the interest of time, I was asked to just do a high-level review of the letter that we provided to the committee. It is our planning letter for the audit for fiscal 2021. Given the nature of the operations of the organizations being consistent to previous years, our audit plan for the most part is consistent with what the committee would have seen in previous years. We obviously do tinker with it every single year, looking for efficiencies to be as cost-effective and as efficient as possible. The letter provided to you is just to give you an overview of what's going to happen during the audit in terms of responsibilities of management, responsibility of the committee, and then our responsibility in terms of what we're going to be doing throughout the audit. So part of the audit strategy is included in there. Very high level, we focus on scoping, understanding the organization, understanding the controls of the organization. We then to look and identify risks or areas that we want to focus our testing on based on the operations of the organizations and our scoping work. We obviously design our audit response and obtain audit evidence. We then form our opinion, and then we provide a report to management and then a report to the committee post-audit, which will have much more details, and you'll get to hear me speak for a lot longer at that point. One of the key concepts of the audit is materiality. One of the things that the committee should always be aware of is the materiality level that we're auditing to. That level is $2.5 million this year. We're basing that on a 5-year average of expenditures. The requirements are to use somewhere between 0 and 3%. Historically, $2 million has been the materiality level. With the increase in expenditures, both operational and on assets under development, that number is floating up over the years as Portlands picks up. So to be consistent for the committee to previous periods and not all of a sudden change significantly the scope of what we're looking at in terms of transactions and dollar value variance analysis, we've
And Lakeshore Boulevard
5 years and maintained a 2% level as opposed to going up higher towards the 3% end of the range, which we would be allowed to do. We think that that's best for the committee, but obviously materiality is something that the committee can weigh in on both at this meeting and then also at year-end meeting for the following year. So, let me know if there's any concerns with our materiality level, but that is our recommendation to the committee to go with $2.5 million for this year. The next part of our letter talks about some of our risks and planned audit responses. So, as I said earlier, we identify the areas we want to focus our testing on. So 2 of them, management override of controls and revenue recognition. Those are standard risks in all audits. We've spoken about them before, so I won't go into too many details about them right now. If someone has a question about them, I'd obviously be happy to answer that. Other areas of audit interest, so areas we'll be focusing testing on, accrued liabilities and assets under development and construction deposits. Because of the construction nature of what the organization is doing, obviously cutoff and timing of funding, but also of payables and what is being allocated between assets under development on the balance sheet and operational expenditures on the income statement is important to us and important to the committee. So we're making sure that both cutoff from a period standpoint and then cutoff between balance sheet and income statement is a focus of the audit. Contribution agreements. So we do review every contribution agreement in detail. Obviously, we don't go over all of them every single year. We've got a database of the historical ones, and new contribution agreements during the year are reviewed to make sure that we understand the critical terms and conditions. Deferral of contributions and grants. Again, that sort of relates to the revenue side of things, what I was just talking about in terms of the cutoff. And then obviously for this year, COVID-19, there's additional forms and work to be completed in our file according to BDO policies and CP Ontario sort of rules. So we'll be doing some additional work around the effect of COVID-19. We'll be speaking to management, and we'll just make sure that management's got the appropriate disclosure in the financial statements based on, whatever effect, if any, that COVID-19 has had on operations throughout the 12 months we're auditing. Fraud discussion, an important piece of what we do during the audit is we do fraud procedures. We're not engaged in a forensic audit, so we're not looking down to the nearest dollar or going to find every potential instance of fraud, but we are doing things outside the scope of the audit, unpredictability testing, looking for transactions outside the normal course of operations where there could be, a fraudulent journal entry being posted or something like that. But at this point, we're not aware of any fraud. If I had been, I would have notified the committee prior to this meeting. But if anyone on the call or on the committee is aware of any fraud or legal activities that are occurring at the organization, I would ask that you either let me know right now or reach out to me post-meeting. Through the letter, there's some additional information on what our responsibilities are for detecting fraud, so that the committee is aware of what we are doing and what we aren't doing in terms of fraud. Audit timing, interim fieldwork has already been completed for the 2021 audit. It was completed back in January. The audit fieldwork is planned for the last week of April and the first week of May, obviously presenting the report to the committee today. And then we'll review the draft financial statements with management the week of May 10th. And we have our closing farm meeting for the audit on May 27th. We'll provide you a closing final letter with our findings and information that needs to be reported from the audit. Appendix A is just our required communication, so indicating what we're required to communicate to you and when we've done it. Most of it does occur at the audit results presentation. And then Appendix B is our independence letter. Obviously, an important part of receiving an independent auditor's report from us is that we, myself, the team working on the file, and all of BDO Canada is independent from the organization. And as of today's date, we confirm that we are, and we'll update that for May 27th as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I think Patrick has his hand up.
Yeah, one question for Jeff and one question for Lisa. Jeff, just on the COVID audit, are you going to do like a review of the remote work? And also from a materiality standpoint, will COVID claims fall under your purview? And for Lisa, just if she could just give us a little bit of context, given that BDO's term is finished up this year, just what the process looks like for the external audit selection procurement. Thanks.
So I'll answer the question on the COVID testing. I mean, we don't look at the remote work environment specifically. We're still testing that the controls that should be in place are in place. So I mean, we're making sure that there's no breakdown in the controls by people working remotely, but we're not necessarily looking at efficiencies of the remote working space or anything like that. And in terms of any financial transactions that relate to COVID or COVID funding, if it's in the financial statements and it's of a material nature, we'll be reviewing that and auditing it to make sure that it's in the appropriate period and it's for the appropriate amount.
And Patrick, just in terms of the audit contract, so in line with our procurement policy, which has a limit of 5 years for our contracts, we will be re-procuring the external audit in the spring of summer, and obviously BDO would be eligible and we would be very pleased for them to submit a proposal in that.
Thank you.
Okay, we will look forward to following up with you, Jeff, in May and before, and let us know how we as a committee could be helpful, but appreciate your report.
We'll do. We'll reach out if needed. Thanks.
Okay. I think next we're going to BTY, am I correct? On their update on the PLFP.
Hello, everybody. This is Joanne.
Okay.
Yeah. So quite a lot of this has been covered, so I'll keep it succinct. During the current quarter, the budget is still 1.185 billion. The estimate at completion is 1.185 billion. As we all know, the 90% stage gate
Together with BTY
in October, which falls within this quarter. By December 2020, we noted that the Waterfront Toronto reporting was reflecting real-time impact to the estimates at completion, which is in line with our expectations. We don't have any concerns at this time, but we'll continue to monitor some items which were outside of the 90% cost estimate stage related to flood protection, parks and public realm. Our understanding is that those costs will be, the estimates for the 90% stage will be completed by summer 2021. The schedule, as mentioned previously, the rebaseline exercise has been the major activity this quarter. BTY has been participating in workshops and had opportunity to review drafts of the rebaseline and provide comments to Elliston and Waterfront Toronto teams. So we're monitoring that activity and we'll be reporting that next period. Based on the current status on the original baseline, we're monitoring that 16 projects of the 22 are currently delayed. So this rebaseline is quite an important activity so that we can get a real understanding, a better presented understanding of what's actually happening and if delays are actually critical or not. In terms of scopes, there were no project charters were executed this period, so there were no changes to the scope. Risk, we continue to monitor the risk register that continues to be updated. Any realised risks were incorporated in the real-time estimates at completion. We noted that there was some COVID realised risks. There are other risks continue to be monitored, and we're tracking those. Generally, we found that the processes in place were consistent with our expectations for projects such as this. If there's any specific questions, happy to answer those.
David, did you have your hand up there?
I do, and I don't have a question, but, just clearly. But I did want to provide clarification, and it's regarding scope. There have been no scope changes to the project, although there's been a substantial addition to the project, and I want to clarify that. Obviously, we have the city have approved us to undertake in the order of $160 million worth of additional work related to the Lakeshore Bridge and Lakeshore Boulevard. That is not a change to the tri-government project, so that the project contribution agreement with the federal government, provincial government, and city will not change as a result of the addition of that project. It's a separate contract, a separate project with the city. And my point in all of this is that we will be reporting on that starting in the next quarter with a separate dashboard. We need to keep the project separate because all three levels of the government want to ensure that costs are appropriately allocated. We will be integrating the schedules for the work, and that they'll be done by Elliston from a health and safety perspective and a coordination perspective, but from a financial perspective, they need to be separate. So I just wanted to raise that. There obviously has been a fairly dramatic scope adjustment to the project. It's not a scope change, and it won't reflect in the 1.185 billion. It will be dealt with as a separate project. So that I just wanted to make that clear in case there were any sort of questions around that issue.
Okay.
I'm on mute. Okay, thanks. Thanks for the clarity, David. Any other questions arising out of Joanne's report? Okay, I neglected to get a motion, actually. Maybe Ina can bring it back up to approve the external audit plan as presented by BDO. So there's the motion at the bottom. Thanks, Ina. Can I have someone make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thanks, Patrick. Seconder?
Happy to second.
Okay, Michael, thanks. All in favor? Okay, we will take that as approved. So unless I've missed anything else before we go into closed session, okay. Well, thanks everyone. Can I get a motion to go into closed session, please?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Seconder? All in favor? Okay, thanks, Jeannie. All in favor? Okay. We are from the closed session. You've got those in front of you related to the minutes. And the additional audit fees. For brevity, can I have someone make both those motions?
Sure, I'll move.
Thanks. Seconded. All in favor? Carried. I'm actually pausing because I have 7 minutes in hand from our scheduled time. But I don't see any other matters before us. Just want to thank management for their efforts in getting all these materials together for us and making them easy to understand and addressing all of our concerns. So unless anybody else would like to raise anything else, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. Seconded. All in favor?
Great work, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your time.
Great work.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Be well.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.